Yeah. Okay. Shyam, can you please share the presentation deck? I just joined from a different laptop and I don't have the deck here.
What happened to
Shyam?
what happened, baby?
Yeah.
Now story time. This
Thank
photo
you so much. So, okay, welcome to Surat MuleSoft Meetup group, and this is our 70th. Topic is releasing open source Dataweave libraries, and we have a great speaker again, Ryan. Thank you so much for having this again. Since we had already a session last week at Bangalore, but thanks for taking this again one more time. So yeah, next slide, please. So today's agenda, the introductions and the data view libraries, open source software explained by Ryan, the distribution, and at the end we can have some networking time. So organizers, myself and Jiten Bafna. He's not there today, but I'm senior application developer at Accenture, and I am newly 2024 ambassador, MuleSoft ambassador, and along with me, I have Shyam and Ryan as the new one, and we have a couple of more ambassadors like we have Abhishek and Francis. Sorry if I'm missing someone else. Next slide, please. So before I hand over this to housekeeping activities, please be interactive. Yeah, safe harbor statement. So this session is being taken up by the host and organizer, and we are doing this in individual capacity. And this presentation is strictly for learning purpose. We do not hold any responsibility that the same solution will work for you. And the housekeeping. So the next one.
5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah, okay. I'll
You
say
want
it.
to? I have the fixed version on mine. If you want me to do the slide.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, the housekeeping activities. So we are recording the session and uploading this to the portal uh, by next 2 days. And please be interactive. Ask the questions as many as possible. We have Ryan here, and please give us the feedbacks at the end. Yeah. Now please take over, Ryan.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'll introduce myself, and I put in the chat. I'd love to get to know you guys too. I thought I'd put this one up as well. Thought it'd be a good little recognition. I wish I could go to Bangalore for the party. You guys are having a party, and who else did you say? Abhishek's here, so let's. It's a bit. I'm new. I'm a new ambassador, so I'm having fun. So are you here? Let's
Yeah,
see.
Abhishek is here, and I see Francis also here.
Yeah, I know, Francis. Some of you have seen this talk before, so I'll try to. I don't know how different I'm going to be able to make the talk, but I did a little couple of different things. Yeah. So, welcome everybody. Yeah, this is cool. This is very cool. All right, we got a few things going on. I'm gonna introduce myself. I put a little more in my introduction slide
Okay.
because of the ambassador thing, and of course because of Any Point Speedway. Something else that is going on, brand new.
Yes.
This just this week is we launched last week Any Point Speedway season 3, and I want to invite you guys, especially those who make the time to go to these meetups. You can distinguish yourself on the speedway. This is no business thing. I don't know how many of you guys do software for fun. This is just for fun. So Pranav Davar was the winner of season 2. He made this with a photo of his own. He made this graphic. So Anypoint Speedway is our is just a place to go make code that you learn. You can use Dataweave in it, and you can make fast code. So you just go anypointspeedway.com. You don't have to participate in Muley Madness. We'll do that soon. Anybody can sign up for the Speedway. There's some instructions here, tells you how to do it. I'd love to see some of you guys on the leaderboard. We've started season 3, as you can see, and there's a leaderboard. We already have one racer up to tier 3, so I'm inviting you guys to do that. That would be cool. So if you do it, I'll tell you at the end of today's session about Muley Madness. There is a deadline for Muley Madness. You got to sign up like right now if you want to be in it, and I suggest that you sign up. There's not just the Speedway. There's also, of course, there's Battlesnake, and I'm thinking of participating in Battlesnake. I don't know how much time I have, so if you want to beat me, do the Battlesnake one because I'm not going to have much time to write a good snake. So, so I appreciate if you put in the chat who you are, where you're from. I like to know who I'm meeting with. This MuleSoft community really isn't like YouTube at all. We are a pretty interactive community. I've seen many of you, Sham and Nitish and Francis, in so many meetups, and I feel like I know you. I got to meet Francis at the Trailblazer DX conference a couple weeks ago. This is a real community, a global community that we're pretty privileged to be in. So I want to know who you are, what you do, where you're from, how you're involved in the community. Let's get to know each other. If you guys reach out to me on LinkedIn because you're here, I'm going to say yes. Or if you follow me on Twitter, I'll probably follow you back. I really like this global community. I feel like it's a real honor to be able to talk to Surat, India. I've never been out of the United States. I live in Oklahoma City. So it seems very, pretty special to be able to talk to you about software all over the world. So that's why I care for you guys to introduce yourself. So I can't see it because I got to take my screen smaller. So I'll do that. That way I can actually see what you're typing. We got Hutaya from California. We got Anoma from Pune. This is cool. Thank you for doing that. I don't know why I got my software updates up. Let's get that fixed. And yeah, we'll just get to know each other. So I suppose we do want to talk about open source Dataweave. I found out, actually, I'm going to fix it right now. I found out when I was working on every time I do a meetup, some of you have seen this presentation before. I found out, I went looking, and it turns out there is a proper way to capitalize the word Dataweave. Here, I'm going to go show you what I found. So I've been doing it wrong in all my meetups. Dataweave has a capital W, and my meetup slide had a lowercase w. So now that's fixed, and this is the right way to do it. So we just fixed that live together. Okay, hi, Ashutosh from Pune also, and you work at Copeland, and Shubra, you're from Jamshedpur. I don't know what Jharkhand is. Is that a province? Yeah. NTT Data, cool. I'm glad to know you've attended. Yeah, thanks for putting that. So, yeah. So you want to get technical? Who wants to get technical? Anybody like technical stuff? Nitish is nodding his head. Nobody else is on video. Do you like technicals? You've already seen this one. Let's see if you can. You might be able to present it for me. We'll see. I want to talk about open source software. We'll start with a certain kind of open source software. We'll start with Dataweave libraries. Look at that. Look at that. There's a lowercase w. Dataweave libraries. So if I want to make Dataweave reusable, there's a few layers to that, right? I can make modules. That's what this is down at the bottom. That's a module called priority queue. A module is a file. It's a DWL file, and you can put your Dataweave in there. And then in other Dataweave expressions, remember, Dataweave is a transformation language, but primarily it's a language. It's a programming language, right? So it has ways to import things. So when I import a module, I'm getting a file, and that's what's at the end of the path here. So the DW, EXT, PQ, that's a path on my class path. And then the priority queue part, that's a file called priorityqueue.dwl that has to be on my class path somewhere. Okay. So one way you can reuse Dataweave is you can make a file in your project, source main resources, priority queue, and make the path DWEXT. That would work just fine, but it wouldn't work in multiple different projects. So if I wanted to use this module that I made in different projects, then I would have to somehow not have it local. You don't want to copy paste files around to reuse them. So the Dataweave is a Java-based programming language. So it has the ability to use the Java technology or the mechanism for importing class path. It's called the class loader, and the class loader gets things from jar files. And there we have a special kind of jar file called a Dataweave library that we can make. And you can make it in Visual Studio Code. So what happened for me is I had a bit of Dataweave logic that I wanted to be able to use first. It didn't exist yet. And I wanted to be able to use it for programming challenges that had to do shortest path calculations. I suppose I one day I can come back and do some pretty neat demos about what you can do with shortest path. But you can do some really fun code with shortest path calculations and recursive data structures. Dataweave's a functional language, so it didn't have a priority queue implementation. So if you're somebody who knows who's used a priority queue data type, you can put in the chat, I used the priority queue for whatever, and then just put in the chat what you used it for, because it's not always obvious to your other fellow programmers why you would even need to make a library. Well, there's data structures that allow you to do things with code that you can't do with arrays or objects. You can't get them done. Like they're too inefficient. So a priority queue is a data structure that's designed for being able to keep track of a one of the good uses for it is you want to keep track of a set of data that's continually changing while you're performing a computation. While you're doing an algorithm, each thing that you calculate, you need to be able to store it somewhere where the best results from the past are available first. That's what priority queue is, a place to put things where the highest priority items are first in the list. So I needed that in Dataweave to do some Advent of Code programming challenges. So after Advent of Code was over last year, so this isn't that old. This is March. I did this in January. So you guys are seeing some, I couldn't have done this presentation last year. I decided I was going to make a priority queue because I was tired of having to stop using Dataweave for certain problems. I wanted to do all the problems out of Dataweave. And so I went and figured out how to make a Dataweave library and reuse a Dataweave library in project after project. So if you want to reuse this one, that's actually what you put in your POM file, that dependency. And then Maven will go find it. And we're going to talk about where it's going to find it and how you can make things just like this that I can find and we can all find, and we can share code with each other. There's a way to do that. Now, I'm assuming some of you haven't spent as long in the open source world as I have, so I might be telling you something some of you might have, and I'm going to say some things some of you know, some of you don't know. Sharing code is actually tricky. It's actually not that easy to share code. I mean, how much of my code are you using? Not that much, right? Maybe this one library, right? So being able to share code with each other takes something. You can't just, the internet's a big place, and there's a lot of code out there, and there's some risks of you go find code that other people use. How do I find code that I trust? How do I find code that does what I need it to do? How do I find code that works reliably, right? So there's a lot of ways we try to share code with each other. So there's this community method of sharing code with each other called open source software. And you've probably heard the term a lot, and I wanted to make sense why it exists and where it comes from, because it takes people like you and me to keep making more of it for it to exist. Otherwise, there won't be any open source. And Dataweave is a pretty new language. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, Dataweave, well, and I'll give you a little perspective on that. I started doing Java. So I'm going to make myself old here, but try to relate this to your own life. I got a book about Java in 2001 because a friend of mine told me it was better than .NET, and he was right. And I still say it's better than .NET. If some of you want to argue, we can take that out of the meetup. I think is better. But anyway, 2001, I was like, how old was I? I was like 22 years old. I went and found Java, and I got a book, and I started learning it on my Linux machine. It was not a new language. It came out in like 93. So when I started doing Java, it was version 1.4. I remember that very clearly, but I learned from a book that had 1.2. That's how it goes with a language. And there was some Java out there I could use, but there was a lot of Java that didn't exist yet, right? So there was a Java thing called Maven that was made after I started doing Java, right? Maven is an open source Java project, right? And I got on the chat room. Back then we used IRC. Today there's Reddit and there's GitHub, and there's, over the time in your career, the way that we work with each other and communicate is going to change. We didn't do video meetups in 2001. There was no such thing. We drove in a car to somebody's office, and they had to come let us in through the badge. And then there was pizza, and some vendor tried to sell us something for 25 minutes. And then finally we got to hear about open source Dataweave, except it was different in 2001. So the meetups and the community things that you participate in, everything's going to keep changing, right? But what you're going to what you're going to find out about is is that there's this growing like group of people out there who want to keep pushing innovation forward, right? So I went and got on the IRC and found out about Maven, and I downloaded it, and it was broken, and there was all kinds of bugs with it. I'm telling you that because right now that's where Dataweave is. In 2024, like how old is it? It came out in well, I remember when it came out. Anybody? Ooh, I'll do a quiz question. Who knows what version of Mule we got Dataweave? Anybody? Let's put it in the chat. Who knows? Here, I'm going to put I'll make a slide here. Here. That's not a good one. Here. Mule 3. Okay, good. Abhishek. 3 dot what? Mule 3 dot. Anybody know? No, not 3.4. We had okay, so extra quiz question. Abhishek said 3.4. 3.4, we did not have Dataweave. We had this terrible other way to do transformations. It was so bad. But MuleSoft didn't say it was bad. I don't work for MuleSoft. I can say it was bad. Who knows how do we do transformations in 3.4? It was called you did use MEL if you were, but that was very hard. Or you could use Groovy, which is what I did. Or you could use Data Mapper, which is what nobody did because Data Mapper was horrible. If you have to migrate code off of Data Mapper, it was an open source Clover ETL thing. Okay, so MuleSoft launched Dataweave in Mule 3.7, which would have been, I think I used it. I was on a project in 2014 or 2013 when it was around 10 years ago. Dataweave 1.0 came out and hardly anybody used it because it was optional. You didn't have to use it. You had to use transform message. It didn't work in Mule 3 in all the expression. You had to use MEL for expressions, Dataweave for transformations. So yeah, so you got good for you. I'm glad you started on Dataweave because I will also say Dataweave is awesome. How many people think Dataweave is awesome? I don't know if you realize the wonderful thing MuleSoft made for the world. I think Dataweave is amazing, and it's solving a problem we're going to keep having. So if you're investing your time and effort learning Dataweave, and I've been in the software world a long time, and I've picked winners many times. I picked Mule, I picked Java. I seem to be pretty good at picking up on I think Dataweave is one of those technologies that's got a long future. So I suggest that you keep getting good at it, right? Welcome Sangamitra from Salesforce. Hello. Yeah. So we are at about the point of the growth of Dataweave where it's matured and it's become, and MuleSoft has announced that it's going to be an open source product. What does that mean? That means we own it instead of MuleSoft owns it. It becomes a community asset, right? Like Java mostly became that. I know Sun got bought by Oracle, and then there's OpenJDK. The whole Java world got really complicated, but I mean, come on, that's got 35 years of history. It's going to get like that, right? Hutaya likes XSLT better than Dataweave. I think I can save you, Hutaya. XSLT is awesome. It's good, but it's only good for XML. That's the problem. Dataweave is just as good as XSLT when you're doing XML, and it's way better when you're doing everything else. That's my recommendation of learning Dataweave. You can do flat files and you can do JavaScript. And I made JSON out of XML using XSLT before. I didn't go the other way. You're not going to make XML out of JSON that way, right? So this is why it's such a powerful language. So once you have a good platform, a good language, like we had Java in 2001, and now we have Dataweave now, what makes it go to the next level is people in the community begin to add things that aren't there that we need. So I added something called the priority queue library. Okay. So when I want to make something, what we have to be able to do together is we have to have a way to share it with each other. Right. So you have to know that it's out there. You have to have a way to find it and discover it. Kind of like we have the Anypoint Exchange for APIs. We need something like that for the Dataweave libraries, some way that you and I can find each other's code. And there's already very good infrastructure on the internet for that, like GitHub and Google and Maven Central. So we're going to learn about all those, right? So the things that get in the way, let's say we have a way to find each other's code. Now we have to have a way to import it, a way to understand our legal requirements. Like if I share it with you, how do you know what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do? We have to have a way to know if it's safe or not. right? And the nice thing about open source is we can all check it and see if it's safe because it's open, right? So I share the source code. You can look at the source code and see if I put anything in there to steal your password, right? Now, you don't have to trust me. You just look at the code, right? So the open source community's philosophy is let's all share source code and we can all check each other's source code to make sure it's good, make sure it's safe, and make sure it's fast, and keep improving it. You could make changes and share them with me and add them to my code, and I can make changes and share them with you and add them to your code, right? Now, there is this concern that we don't all want to share the same. So what do we want people to do? What do we not want people to do? We're going to have some way to communicate about what we want to do, how we want to share things, right? So we call those licenses. The way that the open source community has learned to share is by taking advantage of the legal system. So all of our countries have laws about copyright and about intellectual property. And you and I are software developers. We probably don't plan on spending years in law school. That's okay, though, because other people did that. And they gave us licenses we can use. So there's this whole library of licenses you can choose from that were written by lawyers. So you don't have to be a lawyer. So you can write code and share it with me, and I can write code and share it with you. So there's a website, opensource.org, where you can go look at a nice layman's understanding of all these different licenses that are available. And that's only if you're going to license your code at all. There is a kind of very some people follow a very permissive, so permissive that they don't retain ownership at all. You could write some code and put it into the public domain. So I did not do that with my open source library, and maybe I'll show you why I didn't do that. If you write your code and put it in the public domain, it's not yours anymore. You have no control over it. Anybody can do anything they want with it, and they could sue you in some countries because you gave them, like, let's say you wrote a virus. You put it in the public domain, it goes on people's computers and it locks up all their files and makes them pay you $10 of Bitcoin or something. Like, you're going to get in a lot of trouble, right? And good, because you did something wrong. Of course you should. So the public domain is completely uncontrolled, wild and free, like dangerous. You don't want to use, I don't use public domain software. I don't like it's basically completely getting rid of the code and making it for everyone, right? You don't put your name on it. It's not yours anymore. So it's helpful to retain ownership, to, and use your country's laws. I don't know the Indian government's copyright law, but I hope it's compatible with the American government. In USA and the UK, I know Francis is here, there's some laws about copyright and intellectual property that mean that if you're the author of something, it's yours. You made it, it's yours, right? And that's called copyright, and it's not called trademark, and it's not called patent. All of that is not the same. So copyright is for authors, and originally it was for music and poetry and art. You can make anything, and it's yours because you're the one who made it. A copyright is nice because you can retroactively prove ownership. So if I have a copy of a poem I wrote when I was 5, and I can show you a proof that it existed back then, nobody else can say they wrote it because I have a prior claim. So if you write the code, it's yours. And then what happens next is you could let other people have it. So there's some permissive licenses like Apache and BSD and MIT. This week, there was a big thing in the Redis community. Anybody know about Redis's licensing? Redis's license changed from a permissive to a more copyleft license just this week. Anybody? I'm going to look in the chat. Anybody know about Redis? Yeah, Redis. So I could show you that. This just happened, and it's news. It's big news. Where's my... I don't have the... there it is. We could do that. Redis license change. Redis. So they made a dual source available license. This is more restrictive than what they had before. They used to use I believe the MIT license or the BSD license. The BSD is a very permissive license, says do whatever you want. It's not our problem. If it breaks your computer, do it. So what was happening is the cloud companies were making cloud Redis databases and making lots and lots of money and not contributing anything back to Redis core. So now the people who own Redis, the people who write and maintain Redis, decided to make a more restrictive license that says you can't use it as a cloud provider, basically. So there's two licenses you could use: server-side public license, that's for the cloud providers; Redis source available license, this is for you and me. I'm not a lawyer. I am now concerned, and I need to go read these, or I'm going to have to do some research to see if I can. I love Redis, but I don't know if I can keep using it with this one because I've never heard of this license before. They made their own license. I'm not suggesting you do this for Dataweave because this takes lawyers. If you're going to make your own license, you're going to need lawyers. Okay. So I'm suggesting instead you just go to opensource.org and go shopping and find a good license in here that matches up with what you want to do. And that's a good start to get, look at all these. I use the Apache license version 2.0. I am very familiar with it because I've been using it for over 10 years. So it's not very long. You can read it and mostly make sense of it. And there's a little thing at the bottom that says, here's how you put it in your code. And you just follow the instructions. And now you're using the license. So you can make it simple. And this is a very permissive license. People don't have to give you their changes back. But it does protect you about you being responsible for the warranty. It doesn't provide a warranty. So if you use my code, then I am not responsible for fixing bugs on any kind of timeline. I'm not responsible if it doesn't work in your system. That's your problem. So that's what I wanted out of my license. But you should go see if you make your own Dataweave components, what kind of license you want to use. Yep. And if you want to contribute back to mine, it's going to be Apache license. If you're making pictures, or if you're making logos, or if you're writing books and stuff, there's a same idea called the Creative Commons, and you can make your own. You can share intellectual property of all kinds with Creative Commons. That's not really this presentation. So let's talk a little more about what it takes to make Dataweave in particular. Let's fix the capitalization here. There we go. What it takes to make Dataweave in particular ready for other people to use, because it's not just about the legal part. It's also technical. How do I make it something that you are likely to make use of? Well, what I learned through the process here is Dataweave has a type system, and not everybody. I've been interviewing people for a position last week. Not everybody uses the Dataweave type system very much. I bet you go look in your Dataweave code, you might not have a lot of types defined. Types make it much easier to understand how to use a function, or to understand what information is coming back from a function as a consumer. So if I make a library, and I'll show you what I mean by this. So I learned this from the Dataweave documentation itself. I got to give Mariano Archival credit. This is really good documentation. If you just look in Dataweave core and you go open some of these functions like flat map, look at all this extra stuff in here. It doesn't just say flat map. It has parameterized types. That's this TR. Those are parameterizable types. It has an array of types of T for the first argument. It has a lambda called a mapper that accepts a single item of T and an index, which is a number, and returns an array of some different type, R. And then the whole function returns an array of R, right? So that type information makes it so that consumers, like people who use the flat map function, have a lot of guidance in there when they're writing their code about what works and what doesn't work. So when I make my own open source Dataweave, it's going to make it much less trouble for other people to use in their code if I include all this type information. In Dataweave, type information is optional. It's not required. In Java, it's required. In Dataweave, it's not required, but it's very helpful. So my recommendation for open source Dataweave is that if you're going to make a library, you define types, and then you use types in your functions. So these are actual real functions I used in my library, so that whoever's using them can make use of my code. This here is an optional type. See, so I have an object type and I have an optional type. I'm treating null cases very carefully, and I did all of that just for usability. If you use my library and you provide a null, I want it to be really clear what happens, right? The next thing I recommend for making reusable Dataweave is unit tests. Dataweave has a testing framework. It's still not final. It's a beta, and I still recommend you learn it anyway. It's not, I mean, the Visual Studio Code part is beta. The actual testing framework is 1.0, but the editor, the IDE is not. Even so, I think it's I think it's necessary. I think if I'm going to make a library and you're going to use it, you should not be very you should not trust my library very much if it didn't come with a bunch of tests, so that you know that the library does what it says it does. It's like, does this really do what its requirements say? So I made a bunch of unit tests in my library, and then I put a badge, and you'll see, and that's how it demonstrates that the code is actually doing what it says on the box, you know. And then finally, I found a experimental feature called internal annotations, and this is being used in the standard library, but it's not in the documentation, as at least it wasn't last time I looked. This is a way to make some functions unavailable to whoever uses your library. And they're called the internal. So what I did I made some of my functions not for you. They're only for the library to use for itself. So they're like private functions in Java or something. Use the internal annotation, and that's how it makes the functions unavailable. So only the functions that are in the documentation are possible to use by clients of your Dataweave library. So let's go look at there's going to be some very practical steps you have to do if you want to make a Dataweave library. So that QR code up there, that's the code for my library. And one nice thing about open source is you can learn a whole lot about how to make your own open source just by reading open source code. In fact, I became a programmer mostly learning from other people's code that they released on the internet, open source. So, you know, part of the nice thing about open source is the source is open and you can read it. So there it is. Go read it. You can have it and learn whatever you want from it. I'm going to kind of tell you that some of the basic fundamentals I used, and there at the bottom, I used GitHub. And that's not the only place to share code. It's just a very popular place to share code. So my code is in GitHub, and it's not required. You could pick an alternative to GitHub, and it would also be okay, like GitLab or Bitbucket. There's other, I think SourceForge. There's other places you can share code. What's not really optional is Apache Maven. The Maven ecosystem is necessary because Maven is how the libraries get shared with each other. So you do have to do some Maven engineering to make your library possible to reuse by other people through the Maven mechanism. Luckily, my code has all the Maven stuff in it. You could just copy it into your code using the Apache license, and then you can have an open source Dataweave library. And then there's a company called Sonatype, and they host the Maven Central repository. So I'm going to show you how that works. So that you can see what does it take to share code with each other. So I'm going to start with GitHub. We're going to get out of my slides here. And I kind of had it pulled up already. This is my GitHub repository, and it's a public repository. So if you make the repository public, that's how people get your code. And GitHub has a nice thing where you can put the license right there on the library's webpage. And you also have the license down here at the bottom of the README. So I had to make a README file, and I had to put the license in it. That's part of it, is you want people to know how to use your code. Okay, so that's step one. And the latest version of the code is here. There are branches, but I'm not using very complicated branches because I'm the only author. The minute I start getting a bunch of contributions, we might get more fancy with the branches. Right now, we don't need a lot of branches, but I do have tags because these are the releases of the library. So, you know, you want to have a version that goes out as a release so that when people import it like this, that's what they're importing. And they can go find the code exactly that they imported, right? So that's some of the basic stuff you got to do. And then there's two ways. The next thing I did is I made a README, and I kind of took the approach that the most people come into the README are people who want to use the library, and only later are people who want to help me build the library. So I put contributing down at the bottom, right? So first of all, probably most of your people in the open source world are going to be users, and very few people are going to be your helpers. So I organized the documentation that way. And there's two ways you can use my library. So I chose to make Maven Central work. Maven Central is that's where all your other Java stuff comes from. You kind of just go repo1.maven.org. That's Maven Central. And when you run Maven on the command line, that's where all the dependencies get downloaded from. It's one website. And I don't know if everybody understood, that's how Java works for everybody, not just for millions of people. This website gets used. It's called Maven Central. And Sonatype is a very nice company because they maintain and manage Maven Central. So I put my dependency in Maven Central. Actually, let's go look at that. And you should do that when you do your own open source. So I have a directory in here that I'm responsible for. I'm going to show you how you get one if you want to do it. I picked a group ID. So if you go look in my POM file right here, that's my Maven file. There's a group ID, artifact ID, and a version. And this group ID is a directory on Maven Central. It says software.hag. See that? Software.hag. And I have that matching my GitHub organization, Hag Software. I try to make those match. So in Maven Central, there's a directory called software. That's the first part, right? Software here, right? And inside software, there's my directory, Hag, and I am responsible for everything that's in here. And there's my library, Dataweave PQ, and there's a version 0.1.0, and there's all the downloads. So I am not the owner of the repo1.maven.org website. Sonatype is. But they have a system where I am the responsible for everything in software.hag directory. And that's a group ID. That is called for them, it's called a repository. So one repository for Sonatype is a subdirectory of repo1.maven.org. So that's how my software got distributed, and it used Maven plugins to get there. So you have to do a lot of these little Maven things. You can go into my project and copy paste the POM and change everything, and you'll be most of the way there yourself. I did use a profile in Maven so that the configuration that's used to send things to Maven Central it's separate. It's only used when I'm releasing and not all the time. So Maven profiles are kind of handy for that. And that's part of why I shared the library, so other people can copy that. And that's one way to share the library with the world. That's how you globally share software. Okay. The way that you can locally share software, let's say you just want the library at your company. You can use your Anypoint Exchange, and that's already pretty well documented. There's a blog by Alex Martinez you can read, follow the instructions, and it tells you how to fork a repository, change the group ID. Oops, that's the Alex page. She just got some free advertising. There's the article. Getting started with Dataweave libraries and Anypoint Exchange on developer.mulesoft.com. And so Sonali Shah worked on it too. So Alex and Sonali wrote this nice video and kind of a walkthrough of what it takes to make it in your local repository. So pros and cons, that's not global. It's not going to be good for open source, but it is local and it's good for your company. So if you want to share something just inside your own company, this works just great. So you put the installation instructions of those two methods. And then I put usage instructions. So after you've got it installed, how do I use it? Well, there's code. Every library is going to have its own usage pattern, right? So for mine, you got to import the functions, and you got to use the functions in a certain order to make a priority queue and then add things to it and pull things out of it. So I kind of gave an instruction with an example in there so that folks would know how to use their own priority queue. So that's what it would take probably to get people to use your library. And then when you use the library and you want to make changes, so say some of you want to make a contribution to my library, they can make a fork on GitHub, and then you would have your own copy in your GitHub if you were going to contribute. And in your copy, you would add unit tests and you would add code and then commit and push. And then your fork is different than my fork. And then you can generate a pull request from your fork, and it'll show up on my fork, and it'll say what your changes are, and I can review your code. And then I would know that you had sent me a contribution, and I could incorporate it into the library and release a new version with your improvement, right? So one way to do open source is you make a whole new project like I did. Another way to participate in open source is to send contributions to other people's projects, like Dataweave priority queue. So if you want to contribute to someone else's open source library, that's how you would do it. You would make a fork, you'd send a pull request, it would come into their library. And eventually, if you do that enough, what happens on large projects, so let me show you MuleSoft. After a while, very active projects like Mule, they get many contributors. Look at all these contributors over here. So after they send a few pull requests, they can be promoted to like a committer or a maintainer of the library, and then they don't have to send pull requests anymore. Now they can accept pull requests and make direct commits to the library. So that's how a community forms around a project, is you get added as contributors to libraries. So Mule has a bunch of contributors. Some of you may know some of these contributors. It's a very old open source project. It was on top of the Java ecosystem I told you about. Ross Mason started Mule in 2003, but it joined GitHub in 2006. And then Daniel Feist got involved in like 2007. And you can kind of, Mariano Gonzalez is still involved now. He's been going since 2013, 10 years of contributions. So a lot of people have contributed, as you can see, to this library. Those are all commits, right? So if you get into a project that's very active, that's what it looks like to participate in all open source. Well, Dataweave is now becoming a language that we can have open source like this. Okay. So there's a Slack. I'm winging it now. Nitish, this is new from so anybody who went to the last one, don't fall asleep. I'm going to show you some new stuff. There is a Dataweave Slack where the language of Dataweave and the formats and the engine are all becoming open source. They've been announced by Anna Felicati, is the leader of Dataweave in the inside Salesforce. I don't know if she's in here anywhere. I can't find Anna's posts. She's in here though. She's responsible for Dataweave, and MuleSoft announced over a year ago that Dataweave itself is becoming open source. So if you get good at doing Dataweave libraries, you may be able to help contribute changes to the core libraries of Dataweave soon. So the way to get involved, dataweavelanguage.slack.com. You can join it. You just request an invite. There's no need for you to be known by somebody. You just go join it and get on here and let's talk about Dataweave together and make this language better. And it'll become a whole new and better language because people like you and I are participating in the growth of this technology on the internet. So it'll be just like Mule, but Dataweave will be its own project out in the world. And it won't just be for Mule anymore. Although it's already available in Apex now. You can already run the command line for Dataweave now. So it's already growing up as an open source library. So I better show you the Maven Central part before we go on. So how did it get here in Maven Central? This is not a Dataweave thing. This is a Java ecosystem thing. If you want to be able to contribute your own stuff into the central Maven repository here, you have to sign up on a website. Now there's two websites. I should go to the other one, s01.oss. This is where you actually sign up, and there's instructions on Sonatype's website. You don't have to memorize the URLs. I'm just giving you the shortcut. Like, this is where you go sign up for an account, and then you become responsible for repositories. So I'm going to log in on S01. This is where new since 2021. So that's not that new, but it's 2024 now. But if you sign up for an OSS account in Sonatype, you get an account on this server, and then you become responsible for staging staging profiles. So every group ID that you're responsible for is associated with a staging profile. So I created one called cloud.anypoint. So this is Anypoint Cloud. It's an open source project I want to do for connectors. So we don't just have to do Dataweave, we can do Mule connectors too. And I own Anypoint.cloud. So here it is as a staging repository. So if you make one that would show up in here, you could do your own name. You could, like I did in OSS, right? On my staging profiles. Let's do that. You become responsible for group IDs in the Sonatype repository. And then you can publish software into there. So I have these are the repositories that I have from a long time ago in Sonatype. And it really is just a short process of you put in a Jira ticket, you get access to a repository, and then you publish software into there. Once you have it, you use the Maven command line. So let me show you the Dataweave project. Opened at any point. This is probably what a lot of you were hoping to see instead of a bunch of web pages. There's just a lot of web pages needed. But here's the actual Priority Queue project that's in GitHub. There's a POM file, and it has a distribution management section in it. Where is it at? Did I put, here it is. That points to your staging. It just points to the staging repository. So by having distribution management defined, and then you release and deploy your jar file, and it uses the packaging at the top here, and it uses the Maven plugin. Let me find it. This is the did I put it in the staging part? I probably did. Yeah, they do the plugins. Build plugins are here. The Dataweave Maven plugin, that's what builds a Dataweave library jar. And then it gets deployed, pushed up to the Nexus staging repository. And it's then becomes an open status release. So just by pushing it, it's not the last step. You push it, and then it's up in OSS.sonatype.org. You would then see under your staging repositories, there would be a new item in this list for that release. And because if you look in the in Maven Central, there's a lot of files. If I go in one release, it's not just one file. There's a jar file, there's some cryptographic signatures and some digests. This is all for cybersecurity to make sure nobody puts viruses in here. This ties the release to my name and my PGP key. So, I mean, I guess they can't stop me from putting a virus, but at least they know I did it. It's not anonymous. So this is like authentication and cryptographic proof that I published this library. And you can check and make sure nobody else replaced it with bad stuff because of these signatures. So this is a bunch of files that all have to be uploaded together. So that's a package. It's not, the release is not just one file. It's a package of mini files that goes in your staging repository. And then you would go to the staging repository, and I'll kind of show you the buttons. They're grayed out. When you're doing a release, they don't be grayed out. This item, there'll be an item here for your release. It'll be open. And then when you do the promote part, it'll run a bunch of workflows to make sure that you have all the files you need, that all the math for the crypto adds up, and everything's basically meets the integrity requirements for a public release of a piece of software. And then it'll be ready to be promoted, to be released. And the release button will be lit up. And then you hit the release button and Sonatype goes to work, and it takes a while. It could take 45 minutes. It could take 2 days. That's what I've experienced. I don't know if there's an SLA. I just experienced, 45 minutes is about the shortest, and then 2 days is about the longest I've had to wait. And I think the 2 days was unusual. I think it's usually closer to the 45 minutes. And then your software will be on the internet for other people to use. And then what I did was I put a badge here so that people knew that. And I put a unit test passing badge here so that there's some evidence for people who want to use my library that I did all that stuff, right? And that they can trust my library because, I'm trying to make it ready for other people. So that's how open source, you guys use a lot of open source software. This is where it comes from. This is where and it doesn't just come from me. I'm just a guy, you can make it, and it's only going to be here if people like you and me go out there and make it. So I decided to make it this time. I was doing these challenges for 3 years and unable to use Dataweave because it was missing this thing. I couldn't do certain programming challenges with Dataweave because this was not here. So I decided this year in January, I was going to make it. Nobody else was doing it. So I did it, and here it is. And there's something like that you're going to experience someday where you kind of wish this thing was there and it's not there and you need it. So go make it. And here you can see how to make it. And then we can all have it, and we can build on each other's code, and we can have nice things. This is where, and that's why we have Mule, right? That Mule, Ross did that. Ross made Mule, and now we all have it, right? So that's why we have Java. Most of Java came from things like that. That's where Apache came from. The internet came from people like you and me doing our part and sharing code all over the world with each other in a way that we can keep building nicer and nicer things on top of each other's code, right? So I figured this presentation might be a way to help people know how to do it. It's a lot of steps, but they're not. It's not like rocket science. It's just a lot of steps you got to know and do them step after step and get after it and go make some stuff. So that's the invitation. And if you want to start with just a pull request, if you want to start with some documentation improvements, whatever you want. I mean, somebody wants to make a diagram for mine, I would take that, like whatever, like go, let's just get involved and do your part. And we're going to have a much nicer Dataweave world that we could live in. So that was story time. I suppose I do want to tell you, since today is March 22nd, about Muley Madness. the MuleSoft community isn't just open source software. In fact, it's not that much open source software, but I'd like to have more of it. But next week we're having a competition, and it's open and it's fun, and there's no, I mean, the prizes is just, we're gonna recognize you. So anybody doing Muley Madness now? Anybody gonna do it? I don't know. Are you doing it, Nitish? I saw you unmuted.
No, not now.
There's two. Let me show you. There's two competitions. So my Speedway is one of the competitions. So you can hit the button and apply to do Any Point Speedway, and that you could use a little bit of Dataweave in the Speedway. There's an averages challenge that requires you to do some Dataweave. So that's one of the two challenges. The other one is Battlesnake. Battlesnake is so fun, but I haven't done it for over a year. But if you make a little snake, that one you have to do the code before you apply. Speedway, you can do the code after you apply. But yeah, if you want to participate in Muley Madness, you're going to get some recognition next week on Twitch. So I would recommend it. Otherwise, that's not really. That was just. I only put this in the slides because this is happening right now, like this next 7 days. So I hope some of you participate. Otherwise, we've got a great community to get involved in. I run the Oklahoma City Meetup, so this is an invitation. If any of you wanted to come to a cool talk at my meetup in Oklahoma City, I would love to have you. Send me a note somehow and get in touch. Otherwise, thank you. And if anybody has any questions or you guys want to out and do that, we told you networking time is at the end. This is not an in-person meetup, but hey, we can hang out. We can do some networking. What do you say?
Yeah, we do can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just waiting if someone wants to.
Do we have any Q&As? Do we have any comments, questions? I guess this is going to be recorded. You can, as you guys can tell, I'm not like my meetups don't work as